Whenever we hear politicians talk about global conflict, it's always in terms of peace and stability. But behind all the headlines, there's a whole other story going on. A story about a massive, well-oiled machine that doesn't run on policy, it runs on profit. So today, let's take a good look at how this system really truly works.
It's an intense question, I know, but it gets right to the heart of what we're talking about. Because while war means destruction and unbelievable tragedy for millions, for a very select few, it's an incredible business opportunity.
Okay, so take a look at this. This is where it gets really interesting. As the war in Ukraine was unfolding, the general stock market, the S&P 500, actually went down by 7%. But look at the defense contractors. Lockheed Martin stock shot up 42%, Northrop Grumman up 34%. So while the rest of the economy was feeling the instability, the business of war was just booming.
And you got to understand, this is no accident. This is the result of a system that has become incredibly good at turning global chaos into a very, very profitable business. So here's the bottom line. War has evolved way beyond just being a tool of foreign policy. It has become one of America's most successful and, frankly, most enduring business models. Let's dig into how this machine was built in the first place.
To really get how we got here, we have to rewind the clock. We're going back to a time when America was a completely different kind of world power. Before World War II, the U.S. was mostly an isolationist country, focused on trade. Get this, its army was ranked 19th in the world, smaller than Portugal's. But then, December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor. Everything changed in an instant. America was suddenly thrown into a global war, and it had a massive, massive challenge on its hands.
Well, just think about it from a business point of view for a second. Why on earth would you retool your entire factory to build tanks when the war could just end next week? A surprise peace treaty could mean instant bankruptcy. The financial risk was just enormous, and private companies were not exactly lining up to help. So, the U.S. government came up with a really clever solution: the Guaranteed Profit Contract. Here's how it worked. The government promised to pay for all of a company's production costs, materials, labor, you name it. And then they would add a fixed percentage on top as pure guaranteed profit. What if the war ended early? No problem. The government still paid you. It completely removed all the risk.
And the result? A complete transformation of American industry seemingly overnight. With zero risk and guaranteed profits, companies jumped in. You had Ford's factories churning out a B-24 bomber every single hour. General Motors completely switched from making cars to making tanks. Boeing became an aviation giant. The American war machine was born.
But what happens when the war that created this monster industry is finally over? You'd think everything would just scale back, right? Well, it didn't. Instead, this temporary war machine started to morph into a permanent part of the American economy.
By the end of the war, the defense industry made up a shocking 40% of the entire U.S. economy. 17 million Americans, that's 13% of the whole population, depended on war-related jobs. In this new world, peace wasn't just a political goal anymore. It was an economic threat. And even President Eisenhower, a five-star general who led the Allied forces in Europe, he saw the danger. In his famous farewell address, he warned the entire nation about the growing power of this permanent alliance between the military and the giant arms industry that supplied it. And here's exactly how that complex keeps itself going. It's a perfect cycle. First, defense firms donate millions to political campaigns. Then, those politicians turn around and approve massive military budgets. The Pentagon then uses that money to award huge contracts back to those same defense firms. And finally, you have the revolving door. When officials leave the government, they often get high-paying jobs on the boards of those very companies, and the whole loop starts over.
So this isn't just some theory. Let's look at how this loop has actually played out in real life, turning human tragedy into a corporate growth strategy.
The Vietnam War is a truly devastating example. We're talking about a conflict that lasted almost 2 decades and killed nearly 4 million people. It was a complete human catastrophe. But for American corporations, it was a gold mine.
To really wrap your head around the scale here, just think about this number: 4 million tons of bombs. That's how much the U.S. dropped on North Vietnam over a 10-year span. That's the same as dropping 45 tons of explosives every single hour for a decade straight. And every single bomb, every helicopter, every bullet meant a profit for somebody. Bell Helicopter saw its sales explode from $150 million to over $2 billion.
Raytheon, a missile maker, got over $600 million in government contracts in a single year. The profits were just immense, and they were fueled directly by keeping the war going.
Okay, let's fast forward a few decades to a more recent example, Afghanistan. The U.S. was there for 21 years, and after 2 decades of occupation and so-called nation-building, the end result was, well, let's just say it was highly questionable.
And the cost? $2 trillion. It's a number so huge it's almost meaningless. So the obvious question is, where did all that money go? It certainly didn't create a stable, thriving Afghanistan, but a whole lot of it flowed directly into the pockets of the same defense contractors that have been profiting from this system for decades.
And this brings us right back to where we started. This isn't just ancient history. It's a living, breathing system that is operating right now, today.
This really cuts to the core of the whole problem. The military-industrial complex has created this completely backward incentive structure. When your economy is so deeply tied up with war, peace becomes a liability. A lack of conflict actually becomes a threat to the bottom line.
We see the same pattern just repeat itself over and over again. The Gulf War, Afghanistan, and now the massive aid packages being sent to Ukraine. Every new conflict becomes a new market. Conflict fuels profits, and those profits create a powerful incentive to ensure the cycle never really stops.
So we have to end this by asking the most important question of all. When a nation's economy becomes so dependent on war that peace itself is seen as a threat, how do you break free from that? It's an incredibly complex problem, and there are no easy answers. But understanding how the machine works, well, that's the first step.